Welcome to GalaxyCon Talks Comics with Mike and Patty. How you doing, Patty?
I am well, Mike. How are you tonight?
Good. We're starting a new format because of some of the new things we're doing, and this will be a weekly show where Patty and I talk to comic book industry folks. And tonight we have the one and only Bill Jemas. He is the former Marvel publisher, executive VP, former president of Fleer Entertainment, founder of 360 EP, and currently founder, publisher, and chief executive officer of AWA Studios. Did I get that right?
You got that right. And I have to confess, I percolated up in life as a tax lawyer, and then as a staff attorney, associate general counsel, and then business manager at the National Basketball Association. So I really got my entree into your world was sports cards. So if you remember NBA hoops cards and Skybox basketball cards, yep. that was my posse making that stuff.
We were talking to Dan DiDio last week, and we're talking about how you both kind of came into the comic book world from other real world professions. That generally speaking, a lot of the guys who are running the show are born and raised in comic book land, and there's not a lot of executives who come in from the outside, and that when you came in, both you and Dan faced a little bit of, I guess, criticism and or opposition because you were a little different.
So I grew up business-wise in the National Basketball Association, and we had from top down, from David Stern, rest his soul, from David Stern on down, we didn't hire basketball fans for business jobs. So I got the job at the NBA because I was a tax lawyer, and somebody had to manage the salary cap, and so they figured a tax lawyer, the Internal Revenue Code would fill my back wall, and the salary cap was about this long. But by and large, we would hire people who were successful in their industries and have them bring expertise from accounting, from PR, from marketing, from advertising, from graphics into our world, figuring, you could learn basketball, watch the games, hang out with us, but I couldn't teach a person how to market because I didn't know how. So the recruiting technique, and I carried that throughout the rest of my career, is hire pros at what they do. And it's fun to learn about comic books. It's fun to learn about basketball. And, it was, there was resistance at Marvel it was sort of mid-level resistance. So people who saw their old world ending were looking to hang on, like drowning people want to grab your neck and bring you down. So the industry was dying, and it was time for some new techniques. And there was a little bit of resistance.
So what year was it that you kind of took over at Marvel?
So I had two starts at Marvel. First time was early 90s. From NBA, Marvel brought me in to start up a entertainment card brand. So if you remember the Fleer Ultra X-Men was our first one. We did the Marvel Masterpieces, really beautiful Marvel artwork. And then, one thing led to another. We have to, spectacularly successful trading card business. So this was mid 90s. Yeah. And we had a pretty much unlimited budget. We had a scorched earth attitude towards licensing. So if anything could possibly be successful, we grabbed it. So we just outpaid for every license, and we're really dominant. And at the time, and this is embarrassing, but our stupid little trading card money was bringing in more net revenue than the rest of Marvel combined. But Marvel's owners at the time, the Ron Perlman's McAndrews Ford Group, kept on buying these companies and stacking up Fleers on Skyboxes, on Paninis. And we built $2.7 million worth of debt, and it was collapsing the company. So I went to a management meeting, and I'm the knucklehead lawyer. I'm like, excuse me, we're going to go bankrupt in 6 months, and here's how. And the next day I was fired. They just, sent me home. Here's the severance package, knock yourself out, and sent me home. So I kicked around a couple of fun years at Madison Square Garden. And then Mike Perlmutter and Alan Fine, the guys who were running Toy Biz, took over Marvel, wanted somebody to do merchandise licensing. And And I said, okay, look, I know how to do merchandise licensing. I was an MBA guy, so we breed merchandise licensing. And I said, I'll do that if you let me run publishing and new media. There was hemming and hawing, and I was talking to the board members saying, why do you want to run publishing? And I said, because we can bring publishing back with a storm, and that'll lead the charge back in the business. And seriously, I almost didn't get hired because I believed in comics. That shows you how crazy the world was back then. But Perlmutter, Al, and the guys trusted me. They liked what we were doing. They enjoyed Ultimates, and we had a nice team effort, and it really worked.
How familiar were you with comics before you got into the business? Had you read comics as a kid?
I like to say that I've never read a comic book when I haven't been getting paid to read a comic book. But don't forget, I was a lawyer, so I had 2 months in between NBA and starting at Fleer, and in that 2-month period, must have read 50 comic books a day. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but as many monthly piles as I could, stand, I read. So it was a real crash course. And if lawyers our brains are like bathtubs, you just fill them up. So I filled my brain with all the Marvel stuff, and even at the time, Marvel heyday. Of the maybe we're doing 100 books a month, there may be 5 or 6 really good ones. When I got back to Marvel in 2000, I do yoga now, so I actually could take my foot and put it pretty close to my mouth. And then people say, "What's broken? What are you going to do?" And I'd look at the camera and I'd say, "Well, the comic books suck. So maybe if we fix the comic books, the industry would work." And that was just a horribly stupid and rude thing to say to all my creators and all my fans and all their loyal retailers. But sometimes you just have to look the problem in the eye, and you can't blink, and you have to understand that it wasn't an accident that we lost, good successful book, mid-90s was 1 million units, and sure, maybe 20-30% of that was just people buying boxes and sticking them in the attic. But there were real fans. 75,000 newsstands, 10,000 stores. A lot of the attrition, some of the attrition was the prices were too high. Some of the attritions, we were too greedy, too many bucks. But for the most part, you couldn't hand any Marvel comic book in 1999 to any 12-year-old and have them enjoy the book.
No, we went from, Patty and I remember the trading card stuff because we both either worked in, managed, owned, whatever comic store, and we remember all the Fleer stuff, all the X-Men cards, all the Ultras, the masterpieces.
And you're right, they sold.
They were monsters, and we watched as without any gimmick, without anything, a good solid comic with readership should be selling several 100,000 copies. And I think by the time you came in, some of the books, the key books like Spider-Man, are probably selling in the 50,000 range.
Yeah, right. So the X books were hovering just around 100, and Spider-Man took a big dip. I'll tell you, the lowest selling first issue Spider-Man, maybe of all time, was Ultimate Spider-Man #1. So you talk about the resistance. So up and down the line, Joe Quesada was an exception, Ralph Macchia was an exception, but up and down the line, people inside the company did not like Ultimates. They really didn't like the idea. A lot of people didn't like the idea of Spider-Man being a teenager. And a lot of retailers didn't like the idea of having a lot of teenagers in their stores reading comic books about other teenagers. Luckily, the top 200 retailers, smart as all hell, aggressive as all hell, took a position with the book and really moved Ultimates into the forefront. And Ultimates put us back on the map with kids.
So you did the Marvel thing. You were there for several years. You did a double take a few years ago, and now you're doing AWA. So you've been now around the block a couple of times. You've been in the mix, and right now I think we're entering. We were just talking about this before we got on. How in the late '90s that was a very, very difficult time in the industry, and I think now, this moment in time is probably as bad, if not perhaps worse, than where we were the last time.
So the glass, on the one hand, is fairly well emptied out, right? So heyday, newsstands, 75,000 strong, feeding comic book shops 10,000 strong. So you had a very natural feeder system from quarter a dime at the newsstand, kids on bicycles going down the corner shop to buy comic books, get a few comic books, want to collect, want a perfect issue, go to the comic shop. So there was a feeder system, and it really worked very well. 2000, that was gone, but Marvel was very aggressive. My team was very aggressive sampling free comic books. So, I mean, I could reel them off. 1.5 million X-Men comic books at movie theaters with the X-Men movie. Probably 7 million Ultimate Spider-Man comic books sampled everywhere from KB Toys to shoe boxes. Every time a movie came out, Walmart would hand out 2-3 million comic books right at the front of the store. So vast sampling program translated really directly into people coming into the comic shops to get the rights to the books. And then, had the obvious brainstorm of, rather than having one long soap opera for 40 years of Spider-Man, cutting things down into story arcs so we could do graphic novels. So it was bleak, but there were clear paths to success just by substituting the opening of the funnel from newsstand to sampling, right? And then adding to the back end, so comic shops didn't just sell single copy monthlies, they had something that would last forever, and then everybody had a backlist. Everybody always had something to sell regardless of what was hot and cold, right? Now, poof, right? No newsstands, Marvel and DC aren't going to sample, stores are closed. So that's all emptied out. So now you either crawl up into a ball and hope you're going to grow a shell like a crustacean, or you get the hell out there and figure out what the market's left. And there's quite a bit left, and you got to go hit that what's left. So AWA is hitting hard at what's left. So
digital was supposed to be the great hope of the comic industry. 10 years ago, Comixology, Marvel Unlimited, these things were supposed to do for comic books what, iTunes did for, movies and music, and it didn't. Mm-hmm. What happened?
I'm going to quibble with supposed to, and I won't name names because I when I got into the industry, I spent a lot of time fooling around and talking to my old friends. So pretty much everybody who was running a comic book company, talking to their investors, would say, print is dropping, but digital is going to be the great white hope. They didn't know what they were talking about. There was no evidence to make you believe that anybody was going to pay money for a comic book online. So that was just a story that we would tell each other to get money from other people. If you really looked at it, you didn't believe it. So, but I would say that right now, digital is the great hope. So we don't have a feeder system. The most likely feeder system is build your fan base digitally and then sell people who love this stuff digitally a print version. And, Kickstarter, if nothing else, Kickstarter does a lot of wonderful things, but if for nothing else in comics, Kickstarter, Patreon, GoFundMe prove out that fans who read books for free for a significant period of time will very generously pay money to the creators to buy the books. So if there's a hope, that's the hope that I see right now. But the idea that somebody, that a normal person's going to spend $3-4.99 for a digital Comixology comic book, who's going to do that? You have to be addicted already, right? So that's going to disappear anyway, and you have to have $4 for digits. I'm not poor. I won't spend $4 for a comic book. I can't bring myself to hit the button. So I don't know why people, I don't think that was ever a legitimate expectation. I think that was a lot of BS that got passed around.
So another problem with the comic industry, I think, is that a lot of the people who go to the comic stores look like me and Patty, right? You're talking 40-year-old, 50-year-old men, and there's not a lot of youth in our industry. And the youth, I think,
not to quibble, at 62, 40 looks pretty young. Okay, so but yes,
we're the last.
He thinks I'm 40.
I'm 45. So I'm 45. We're the last of the generation of guys and girls who came in, pulling comics off of a newsstand, getting into the industry. After us, you had to be drug into a comic store by a brother, a sister, a friend, or somebody. There was no your parents buying you something off the spinner rack. The kids today are reading manga. They're reading the young adult, graphic novels, which for some reason most comic stores refuse to identify as comics. There's so many dinosaur retailers that look at manga and the young adult stuff and go, that's not a comic book. And I go, but if it looks like a comic and it talks like a comic and walks like a comic, isn't it a comic? Even if it's in a smaller format that you flip through. I mean, what's the difference between a manga and the digests that DC put out in the early 80s? Well, the manga is just thicker. It's the same thing, but these stores and a lot of the want to hold to their superheroes or their specific audiences. And I think that's damaging.
But yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Pat. Actually, if you guys don't mind, I just wanted I told Patty and Mike, so my COVID confinement is in the attic of my house. So my wife and my son are downstairs. I just have to go open the window because it's hot up here. So you keep talking.
So to echo your point, Mike, it's like what if McDonald's only sold the Big Mac and nothing else? And that's what they don't understand. The retailers, like, you're in the merchandise business. You're selling specialized merchandise. And yeah, the superhero stuff is maybe at the top drawer, but once in a while, somebody walks into McDonald's and says, "I'll have the Filet-O-Fish combo." And that's what and now one thing's getting bigger than the other. So, yeah.
So, part of the problem with analyzing why people make bad business decisions is sort of looking at the core of it. And I do have to say, I put this foot in my mouth so many times. When Marvel instituted a no reprinting, no overprinting policy to build collectability, and the top 200 retailers were thrilled because now they could buy a book for $1 and sell it for $50, but many retailers were upset. And I just said, well, this is like an IQ test. If you pass the test, you buy the book. If you don't, you don't, which is really horrible and, again, stupid thing to say. As I've gotten to know retailers better, it's not candle power. It's just recognizing that they have built a business based on people with a particular taste in Marvel and DC superhero comics. And to get teenagers into the store, that's a whole different kettle of fish. That means you have to be very aggressive. And like, the retailers and I do that do this, you have to be really aggressive to get new customers. And when you're just hanging on and paying rent and you don't have that audience, and now you take your open to buy dollars and take them out of Spider-Man and put them into what the hell is a My Hero Academia? It's awfully hard to do. And you're hanging on with every month. Way more sympathy for that. And listen, I have the same sympathy now when I talk to retailers about digital as the feeder system. They see, listen, digital is going to cannibalize. It's not going to feed. Very good, successful retailers look at me and say, Bill, if once you get used to reading your comic book digitally, you're not going to go buy the print. I don't know if that's wrong or right, but I can say right back, if it's not digital, then there's no other feeder system, and let's just go work for a living. Because if digital doesn't work, there's nothing else on the horizon that has a reasonable opportunity to bring fans into the business. Now, that's because I don't run Marvel anymore. If I ran Marvel, if you ran Marvel, there wouldn't be a 12-year-old who didn't get a free sample every time they bought anything. But that's not going to happen. That's not what Disney. That's not what Disney and AT&T are.
And there'd be a Spider-Man comic on the shelf every month that appealed to a 12-year-old.
Yes, and when you watch the Black Panther movie, you could read a comic book that had something to do with the Black Panther movie. But now it's not. It's going to be in the hands of the independent comic book companies and the independent retailers to bring the business back. And I think it's really embrace digital or figure something else out. But don't sit around waiting for fans to show up. They're not going to show up.
You raise an interesting point about the independent companies because, again, Mike and I in our generation, we went to the comic shops. Yeah, we were getting our Marvel and DC. But again, something else that factored into locking us in was our exposure to all the independent stuff at the time. First Comics, Eclipse Comics, they were putting out more mature stuff, and again, that fed into there's a deeper side of the pool that I was solely gravitating towards, and again, it built me into a customer.
And there were and some of the, there was exclusivity on some stuff. Like there were some books you could only get in the direct market, you couldn't get on the newsstand. And then I don't know if it was Shooter or somebody said they wanted to do exclusives you could only get on the newsstand.
Yeah,
couldn't get it in the direct market. And then his attitude was, well, let the guys at the stores go pick them up off the newsstand if they want them so bad. But you're doing a trade-off. So under that model, you'd have stuff right now that you could only get in stores that you couldn't get digital, and there'd be stuff that you could only get digital that you couldn't get in stores.
So just a couple of things, Patty, back to your point. I think the other thing that the indies did, and listen, Image, living proof, got Marvel and DC off their butts. Because the quality of the work from the indies was stronger. It wasn't censored. There wasn't anybody in a suit saying you can't do this, you can't do that. It was just, wonderfully free, and you could see the freedom and the beauty of the artwork, and you could hear and read the freedom, in the expression. Digitally, to me, the path right now is the webtoon style phone comics. If you haven't checked it out, I recommend check it out right now. Line Webtoons, Tapas. Any of the Korean and Asian companies that do comic books custom for your phone. What's interesting about doing comics that way is, listen, I don't see, and again, this is training. It's just really how you grew up. I didn't see the NBA as basketball games. I didn't see Michael Jordan as a basketball player. I saw Michael, certainly was a wonderful basketball player. But, he was a video game, and he was a jersey, and he was a home video, and he was a pair of sneakers. And, Spider-Man was always the same way to me. So when we create stories, it's panel by panel with a script. The digital version has to be different. You can't put all those typed words in a digital comic and expect anybody to keep scrolling. So a really well-made digital comic will have maybe 50% of the text of a really well-made comic book. And the digital comics read a panel at a time. And then when you go convert to a real comic book, you have the opportunity to bring in some beautiful artworks and 2-page spreads and things that your phone just can't handle, you can handle in print. So there's a natural, unless you force them to be identical, they're naturally different products. And one should really feed the other.
But they have to.
Right. And if I'm wrong, then if that's not true, then I don't know what is true. And if someone has something that's true, that's better than that, this is aid to artists, writers, and artists in Cuppy. We're just made to survive. We'll do anything that's logical and reasonable.
I think the Dio said something similar about how digital needs to be different, how they have to come up with a new way that isn't the standard comic. And they have not, nobody's been successful in the American market with that yet.
I think it's just greed, Mike. Because if you look at the free digital readership across the board, free digital readership of comics, but comics has been healthy and growing. And until recently, the quality level was not as good as the print side. It's getting better now. But I just think we were charging too much for comics. Look, your standard comic book now $3.99 for 32 pages. That's insane. That's just, we do it too, but that's just a crazy price, so we're sort of priced to sell to Patty and Mike. And then the challenge is to look surprised when nobody else buys. So on the digital side, DC and Marvel I really don't know the specific pricing. I haven't paid a lot of attention, but across the board, the pricing on Comixology is 10 times higher than it should be. And they have the low sales results to prove it. So I don't see Comixology as building anything. I think what Comixology does is they service a growing group of older consumers who are losing their local comic shops and don't have any other economical choice but to read online. But that's not a real business model. That's just squeezing a little bit extra water out of the sponge.
Yeah.
So what do you think? I mean, what do you think of DC's decision to basically prop up and create 2 new distributors to push out comics?
So it was a handful of things that got me fired from Marvel the first time through. It was standing in front of the Marvel train buying Heroes World. And so I guess I should give a background because not everybody's 800 years old on the call.
Yeah.
Back when comic books were successful, there were 9 aggressive competitive distributors, all of whom carried everybody's property. Yeah. So an aggressive distributor who might not be able to get the corner candy store could go down to the local gas station, put a spinner rack up in the local gas station. And they could do that because everything you need, Mr. Gas Station, is going to be on this rack, and you buy it from me, and it's one check, and here's the first set of comic books for free. The minute Marvel bought Heroes World, and I'm more or less reading you a transcript of the meeting that got me fired, the minute Marvel bought Heroes World, now the gas station has to buy Marvel from this distributor and DC from that distributor and Image from that distributor, and you can't see the finger I'm putting up now, but that's what the world said to us. And it was very clear that was going to happen, and we did it. And we helped ruin the industry.
That was a querulous period, certainly. And because we're in South Florida, it was Capital City was our vendors down there. And again, great bunch of guys, great business.
Wonderful company. Yeah.
And that mentality spilled over into gaming as well. Games Workshop tried to do the same model as well, and with the same results. And I always wondered about that too. It's like, I just assumed there must be somebody in a room that the math of this works for them, but I don't even think they get worked on that aspect.
It's a long and sordid story. When I came back to Diamond, so look, I mean, part of it is Diamond is a frustrating company to deal with because their information systems are not up to par with the rest of the distribution world. And that's not an accident. I mean, let's beat Theodore Roosevelt for a minute. Monopolies don't work in a capitalist system. So anytime there's a single anybody that dominates any industry, you have to get inefficient. That's what happens everywhere. So if you know the guys at Diamond personally, they want to do the best they can do, but nothing drives you forward like competition. So I think I very seldom applaud DC, but in this particular case, the addition of more distributors ought to help the industry.
Marvel's been very quiet during this time, which is shocking that the industry leader isn't leading. And that DC is the one making, very bold moves to get books flowing again. So I would imagine that if you were at Marvel, they would not be as quiet.
Yeah, I think if I was at Marvel, I would have had a heart attack by now. So just as well. I'm not going to carry that piece first.
So what's going on with you guys at AWA right now?
Yeah.
Are you still putting out books digitally? Are you working on new stuff?
Yeah, so we have a dream set of investors and a dream board of directors. And sort of to name names, the first company was Lightspeed Venture Partners, most famous for taking Snap public, so that they were digital all the way through. They tolerated Bill and Axel's print first philosophy, but we were gearing up for digital distribution a month after each book was issued, and we were also geared up to deliver books not just on Comixology but on Webtoons and Tapas format. And the other investors are James and Liz Murdoch. They're the siblings who left the Fox News empire and set their own funds, and they've been 100% supportive. So they're not the kind of people who are timid when there's a crisis. A good friend, a Marvel person always says that the Chinese symbol for crisis and opportunity are the same. And as a company, we really believe that this is a crisis and it's horrible, but there's an opportunity to move successfully in the business. So right now, everything that we're doing, we're releasing first digitally on Webtoons formats and on our website for free. And then ultimately, the books will all go to Comixology and to comic shops in a format that's significantly different than the Webtoons format. We've kept all of our employees up and running. We've kept all of our creators busy. And we have enough money to go for a pretty long time. And then we have good backing should all that fail. It's just very hard to handicap right now Mike, you know as well as I do, many stores hang on by a thread, and as much as people complain about Diamond, every once in a while you stop and say, thank God Steve keeps on funding the industry, right? So, but then you really wonder that stores who've been living, sort of month to month, whether they'll be able to come back and how many will come back and how robust the business will be. So it's a little bit worrisome for, good people in businesses for a long time.
I think there was a death clock already, on comic stores. I mean, Rich at Bleeding Cool loves to post every time a store goes out of business. And, it's almost like watching CNN with their COVID clock, where for the last couple of years, it's how many stores have gone out of business this month. And I think a lot of people have had the sky is falling, mentality. And yes, a lot of retailers are living hand to mouth. They're living on a wing and a prayer. And I don't know that. I don't think 30% of them, if not more, I think 30% of them go away, by the time this is all over. I don't know how they come back. I don't know with rents, with their distributor bills, with everything. I mean, I don't know how they open their doors after this is over.
Yeah.
So it's not, there's only so many sketches Jim Lee can auction off to front the industry. And it's hopefully Steve, is hopefully Diamond is understanding with some of these guys. But again, they're a business. They have to pay their bills, and they have to pay DC, and they have to pay Marvel. So it's
Steve. Hats off to Steve, who was very encouraging to all of us. And especially explaining that his bank is behind him and willing to go, and that was all very encouraging and good. I mean, look, I have two minds about this. One is we have bigger problems than the life or death of the comic book industry.
Sure.
There's a major economic collapse out there, and part of the reason you keep going is the opportunity for everybody to be successful in the long haul. And yet we have the luxury in comics that we're pretty much all virtual anyway. But Mike, I do have to say, as we were starting AWA, we thought, okay, what are going to be the feeder systems for comics? There were really two. It wasn't just digital; it was also the shows. So as AWA really was very committed last year and had been very committed this year to sampling at the shows.
Yeah.
So hopefully the advent of, and as your business comes back online, hopefully comic conventions will be a feeder system, and hopefully retailers getting into comic conventions will be a source of additional income. There's that part of it, but I also believe that the comic book voices, the creator voices, are important. I think we've kind of restricted ourselves to men in tights, and now we have women in tights, but there's a lot of tights. And, foot in the mouth, you really wonder if reading superheroes coming to save your sorry ass for 20 years, if that's really prepared you to face a crisis. So if you're sitting around waiting for a superhero to come and save you, you got to start reading different books. So I won't mourn the diminution of superhero stuff. I want to hear Mark Miller's voice. I want to hear Brian Bendis' voice. I want to hear Joe Straczynski's voice. I want to hear what creators have to say, and so does our board. So, a lot of the reasons why I keep coming back and beating my head against this wall is there are important voices that need to be heard, and we have the opportunity to put them in front of a large audience.
I think
digital opens up that door. And the crisis gives us all collectively the opportunity to take stock and say, that old world ended. And now we have to find a new world. And digital and conventions, when conventions come back online, is going to be one of the keys. And off we go. We have to try that.
Well, you've got a partner in Axel Alonso, who, while he was Marvel's editor-in-chief for a number of years, really comes from a more experimental background with Vertigo.
Yeah.
And really knows how to work with creators to bring out their voices, and not in the suit and not in the spandex and tights kind of variety. So you theoretically have somebody with you who knows how to pull that out of people.
It's not a theory. Axel has a knack for so much of editorial at Marvel, and I don't know how DC is going to come out of this, but historically DC, there's probably an acronym I can think of. I'll think of when I get off the call. They're in charge of saying no. So regardless of what you wanted to do, if it was good and smart and funny and interesting, Paul Levitt's answer was no, right? And then that carried over for year after year after year. Whatever you wanted to do that was good or interesting or fun or lively, Axel never had that attitude. Axel figures out what's missing in your story and helps you fill it in. But he does not censor people. And I think that's one of the reasons why AWA has so many star creators working for us on not extravagant budgets. We're not outpaying people. We're just giving them a better atmosphere and a more fair and square deal. But a lot of what brings people in is the opportunity to work with Axel.
I would concur. I think I always pictured Axel as an old school style editor with 21st century sensibilities. He really had, in the sense that, and I've been on panels before where a lot of writers have lamented they really don't get edited anymore. It's just like, okay, go deliver the script next week. Don't you want to talk about it? No, I hired you. You can go. And everything I've heard about Axel is that he's really creator driven. He's really like, okay, let's talk about this too. And I can just tell by your inventory that you guys are putting out that is really strong, definitive visions. It's not just, okay, Mega Man, Ultraman, Super Duper Ultraman. It's not a business before. You have some very identifiable brands, and the minute you see them, that looks different from this, that looks different from that, and this is what we need right now.
Right. So it's Axel, and it shows Straczynski and Garth. It's a good cadre of dedicated, serious people trying to do something important. So I'm seeing tweets come and grow, and maybe I'm seeing things come and go across my screen. I'm happy to answer people's questions. I just don't know even how to find them. So do we have enough time for me to answer questions?
I don't think we really have a lot. A couple people have.
Some people have been throwing stuff up, some things like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I'm just
going to pull it up.
There's a new format for me.
So comics started, during the Great Depression as a kind of an entertainment medium. And, comics, we were talking earlier about how we have a lot of problems right now that, about a complete economic collapse. I mean, where this country is in there are issues. But the last time we had a Great Depression, that's when comic books came out, and they were originally a very cheap, disposable form of entertainment. And that they are not that, as you were saying. The cost of comics is comparatively, 10 cents for a 50 some odd page comic, in 1935, even before Superman. And now you're talking about $4 to $5 for what's essentially 22 pages of story.
Yeah.
Even though it's better.
Let's unpack that a little bit. So first, your point's very well taken about comics during the Depression as a cheap form of entertainment. And I would say historically, pamphlets have. I hate that word pamphlets for comics, just like I hate the word floppies. But the word pamphlets, pamphlets have always been important historically, from Common Sense, Thomas Paine, to the Little Red Book. Pamphlets circulate quickly, easy to read, really matter, really move the needle of public opinion. And I think that's one of the reasons why in the McCarthy years, the right wing clamped down so heavily on comic books, was because they could be so influential and so powerful. So as to pricing, there's just this painful math of running a business that you knee-jerk to look at what your costs are and price at a multiple of your costs so that you can make money. And the problem with that is if you price too high, then your print volumes drop and your per unit costs go up. So if you're printing 50,000 comics, your running cost is 20 cents. And you don't have to charge $4. You can charge $1 and you can still make a tremendous amount of money. The problem is if you're little and you don't have a lot of audience and you're not established yet, then your print costs look a lot more like $1 or $1.50 a book. And then just to cover your art and editorial and stay alive, you're charging at $3.99. So to be successful, it takes some guts. You have to be, raise enough money or risk enough money to print enough books to sell it cheaply enough to have a chance to start. And you can fall on your face doing that, or you can be crazy successful doing that. Marvel decided in 2001 to be crazy successful with graphic novels. So when we hit the graphic novel market, our first print runs were 10,000. So we printed the books for $1.50 and got them sold into retail way deep discounts. So the books could still be $10 and have retailers still make a lot of money. So a lot of the problem with pricing now is as volumes get low, there's so much pressure to raise your price. And thankfully and unfortunately, there's still enough 40 to 62-year-old men and women who will spend that money. But that's just missing the opportunity to bring new people in. And in the long haul, it's a fool's game.
Well, Sandy had a question.
Hi, Sandy.
And she wants to know what the modern equivalent of a comic is in today's depression. And she's saying it's Netflix. And thinking on that, well, on Netflix, you're getting these Daredevil, Luke Cage shows that are, 8-10 hours of content. Mm-hmm. And you're paying, what, $15 a month for Netflix and getting all this content that you could watch for hours at a time. So it's kind of an all-you-can-eat thing. And I think, on top of that, like Marvel Unlimited, where it's an all-you-can-eat kind of buffet, or, Disney Plus, these kinds of things. So when you're trying to charge $4 a book, it's kind of hard to combat those other platforms.
Yeah, I mean, Sandy, I think your point's well taken. I would pile on that Netflix especially, but also Amazon, they've gotten very aggressive and innovative because they understand, in the old days, 3 networks. So if you didn't do something that was going to appeal to a third of America, if you couldn't find the lowest common denominator, you weren't going to make money. Netflix just these wonderful niche documentaries and very much creator-driven, simple works. So not only are they price point lower, right, they're reaching a much wider audience with a much more diverse range of content. So, my dream is, you're watching Mark Miller, one of Mark Miller's now 6 or 7 series that's going to go up on Netflix, and then you can sort of point your phone at the screen and then scroll through his comic book that you get for free. So hopefully we'll figure out a way so that as you're watching a program on Netflix, that you can get a download of a comic book that expands the story on your phone or on your computer. So ideally, we'll be able to work with the streaming companies to use comic artwork and comic talent as a feeder system for movies and TV shows. Well, listen, that was the Marvel and DC model for years. In the past 10 years or so, that's fallen by the wayside. I mean, back in the day, when Axel and Joe and I and Tom Brevoort and company were clicking on all cylinders, we were able to do such a diverse range of high quality content that we really kind of showed the world how to tell stories about superheroes. And I think that can happen again. It may not happen at Marvel DC as much as it happens at Netflix or Hulu or Amazon.
This is where we're at. One thing that I was really taken by when I was doing my remembrance during your tenure, and since we're living in a querulous time now, Marvel was under your stewardship during 9/11, and I always thought that all the product that Marvel put out then was very, very tasteful, very, very soulful, and very reverential. At that time, we all know everybody was trying to put an American flag on the cover of whatever they were doing, and everybody was going out of their way to be a part of sharing the experience. And hey, everybody, we feel for you too. But what you guys were putting on Outwise, I thought was very well done, very above the bar.
So thank you for saying that, and I appreciate it. I'm sure Joe Quesada, who led that charge, would especially appreciate that. I do have to say there was a point when I felt that we were helping to beat the drums of a horribly immoral war. And one of the things that we tried to do was counterpoint war is the answer. We did a really fun and wonderful book called, I think it was called 411, but it was just the idea, a little bit more information about the other side of a conflict. And, you know, sadly the book didn't matter. I mean, sadly the war just kept coming. And the results have been disastrous, you know, sort of up and down the Middle East and up and down the nation. So, I mean, I do think, you know, a few of the employees lost people in the bombing, well, in the crash. And, you know, I think that spurred us on to do that 411 book, you know, sort of a tribute to people who actually died there. Yeah. And I just wish that book had done better. I wish I had more time to focus on it.
Yeah. And I know Straczynski's issue of Iron Man, him and John just knocked it out. And I know they both
Spider-Man, Patty.
Spider-Man, the black cover. Yeah. The Spider-Man black cover.
Yeah. We interrupt this inter-program for a special message. And I know they both said since then that they've never been able to look at it since then. So, and hopefully we'll never need another issue like that again.
I didn't save a lot. I saved that one.
There's a shot of Dr. Doom in that book. That's just, you know, if you're a comic book nerd, it's a big scene. So they
I
did
have to say, Joe's first run on Spider-Man, I don't know. I mean, I have a horrible memory. I mean, I never had a good memory. It's not getting any better. Joe Straczynski's first run on Spider-Man, he had a scene where another Spider character was fighting a villain with Spider-Man, and Spider-Man was just like knocked down, about to get killed. And it was just wonderfully poetic. And I'll butcher it, but this wonderfully poetic statement from Spider-Man was that I always wondered what it felt like to be a victim and have Spider-Man come and save you. And now I know it feels pretty good. And nasty old guy that I actually had a tear from reading that. So, you know, I called Joe immediately. I said, Joe, somebody finally got me. And it was Straczynski on that one issue. It was beautiful.
So you're working with Joe on The Resistance?
So Joe has 4 series going with us right now. A couple creator-owned that haven't been announced yet, but a couple in the Resistance universe.
Excellent. So who are some of the guys you're working with right now and their books?
Oh, don't put me on the spot. I'm if you haven't noticed, I'm very dyslexic. So when I get off the call, I remember all the things I should have said. So if I had my piece of paper in front of me, I'd have everybody. But
you got Peter Milligan on American Ronin, which I'm very interested in because I'm a Peter Milligan fan. You got
he's teamed up with ACO, and the artwork is killer. We've had some preview pages out in Upshot now. Yeah. Just killer artwork, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
I think ETER just came out.
Right, Peter's written some of that, and then a good friend from Double Take Days, Jeff McComsey, wrote an issue of that. Ben Percy did a wonderful job. Ben and Axel recreating the world of zombies. Just a lot of really good talent. Rob Williams has our next book to be released is by Rob Williams, Old Haunts. Just, you know, it's a nice, solid set of talent who are just dying to work with Axel in an atmosphere where they could do 1 or 2 books that they own and 1 or 2 books that we own. So everybody gets their own books and we help sell them to Hollywood. And then they do some books that we own and they get some stock in the company.
I'm interested in Bad Mother. That looks like it'll be fun.
From day one. And Krista Fouts is writing it and DiDio's drawing it, and it's beautiful. Just beautiful.
So somebody wants to know, do you ever work with Stan Lee on anything?
No. Just just a funny conversation with him. He was busting my chops. Partially because Stan came out with this is like 2000-ish. Stan came out with Stan Lee Media, which was a .comic first company. So as we're doing Ultimate Spider-Man, we changed him from being a newspaper reporter to a webmaster. And Stan called and said, "Why don't you just make him a dentist?" It's just the funniest line. But what Stan would do is you could call Stan with a creative problem, and he would give you a really innovative solution. So now I never had the opportunity. So when I got to Marvel, he had his own company and he was still cordial and helpful and would give us a pep talk, but I never had the opportunity to work on a book with him. The timing never worked out.
Absolutely fair. What's the ultimate ambition for all this? Where'd you like to see this cresting at?
The way AWA is set up. So think of us again. There's that saying, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I see AWA as the league office, so as the NBA league office, and then have a lot of imprints like Upshot that are the teams. So we bring in as many creators there's not a lot of Axels in the world, but we bring in people who want to leave their imprints, and we fund them, and we say, don't worry about the back end. Whatever it takes to market, we'll do. And you saw that with Upshot. We pulled out every stop you could possibly pull out, right? So that's what I'd love to see, is a platform where really good, innovative, creative voices get funded and security to do what they do best in teams with an editor to help them through. And then we promote the heck out of the books digitally, get a couple of million readers for every single book, and then have that feed a successful comic book business. That's the dream. And if all that happens, then movies and TV shows have to happen. And you see all that stuff in back of Mike, that's what I really do well. I'll fill up shelves with that stuff that's in back of Mike.
What's been because you've been on the convention circuit, what's been a memory that resonates with you with meeting a fan?
Oh, well, let me tell you my best and worst memory of comic book conventions. Mike was nice enough to fly me first class to one of his conventions and set me up to do two, talks.
Sure.
And the first talk, I got in front of this big group of people, and Mike, I don't know if you remember it, I completely froze. I could not say a word. And I said to everybody, listen, I'm just too nervous to talk right now. I'm going to sit here at the edge of the stage, and you can ask me questions and I'll try to answer. But for the first time in my life, I'm too nervous to talk. I don't know what happened to me. That was horrible. But then, Mike, you asked me, I think Jim Shooter was supposed to do something with a moderator, and the moderator didn't show. And I got to share a stage with Jim Shooter for an hour, and he was the most entertaining, funny, glib, axe to grind, joke to tell. It was absolute blast. It was an absolute blast. And there was a certain point when, I just added up, he had started Valiant Comics and Defiant Comics. I'm like, yeah, Jim, you are Valiant and Defiant. It was just, that was my best memory of a comic book convention. And the other times it was mostly with Joe Quesada and the guys at the Chicago shows at Morton Steakhouse, getting a little drunk at night, saying, "Gee, what if the American government really did have a super soldier serum in World War II? Would they have given it to Steve Rogers, or would they have given it to a bunch of black guys to see what would happen? And then what would happen if one of the black guys really was a hero? Would they have touted him as the person who saved the war, or they would have found a Pat Boone to stand in his place?" So we would just come up with these ideas. So a really fun book called The Truth, which was Black Captain America. So stuff like that would come out of the conventions. And that was really the only place it could happen, because that was the only place we could be in person, face to face, with a little alcohol and a little time to just let our hair down and think of things that we would do if management would let us. And they would look at me and say, "Well, you're management. Are you going to let us?" I'm like, "Okay, let's go."
You've had a really remarkable run, Bill, and you are continuing this run too in this new enterprise. And again, you said yourself that you are in this world, but you're sort of an outsider. And to use an aphorism or an analogy from the geek world, you are a Mr. Spock to all these Captain Kirks that you've assembled, and it's this attachment that gives you this clarity and gives you this success. You're able to look at the numbers, you're able to do this, and this facilitates this fountain of creativity that you did at your time at Marvel and what you're doing right now. So I just say, keep up the good work, because it really is something like miraculous you're building on, and I'm so excited to see what comes out of this.
Thank you. And I'll say fascinating, Patty.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Oh, this is my basketball finger. So one of my fingers doesn't work because that's my little basketball injury. I can do it.
So we're going to wrap this up. We're almost at an hour. So I want to thank you, Bill, for joining us.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Tell everyone to go to AWA Studios website to see what you guys got going on. It's awastudios.net is the
And
website.
you can read all of our first issues for free in a webcomic format that's significantly different than our print format.
And then next week we have Jim Starlin on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
And then the following Tuesday, speaking of Jim Shooter, we have Jim Shooter, who's one of my favorite people to talk to.
I'll be typing questions.
Yeah. Okay.
Please do.
I think, Jim, has he's one of those guys that was very, like you, very opinionated, got a lot of heat, and did a lot of great things, took a lot of risks, and tried to get, the trains to run on time. And, did a lot in this business, but, sometimes gets beat up for having been the boss. People don't always love the boss because the boss has to say no.
The boss or people don't like it when the doctor gives them the bad news, but offers the cure, but it's going to take a while. It's not what you want to hear.
All right, guys. So thank you, everybody who's watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll go backstage.
Okay.
Thanks again for tuning in to GalaxyCon Live. Make sure to check out our online store at galaxycon.myshopify.com, where you can find t-shirts, signed and certified Funko Pops, autographs, collectibles, and more. For updates on the upcoming streams, visit us on Facebook at GalaxyCon Live or Galaxy